Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Hello and welcome to this very special program
about a recent period in Jewish history that must be told to your children and all the generations that follow and must never be forgotten.
It's the Walter Bingham Files contribution to Yom HaShoah, Israel's own Holocaust Remembrance Day. Although it was officially commemorated last Tuesday, I bring you today an exclusive interview with Rainer Höss, the grandson of the Commandant of Auschwitz, the infamous Rudolf Höss, who was hanged by the Allies on the 16th of April 1947 at the same place where he committed the unspeakable atrocities in front of the crematorium at Auschwitz. I am Walter Bingham, and I begin with some short comments on recent developments on the Israeli political scene, the developments to form an emergency unity government, as well as Netanyahu's efforts to stem the proliferation of the coronavirus. Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed with General Gantz on conditions to allow them to form a unity government and avert a fourth election. Netanyahu will continue as Prime Minister for the next 18 months, and then General Gantz will succeed him. To do that, Netanyahu has sacrificed the core conditions and principles of the right for his personal survival in the hope to avert a High Court ban on his premiership. I also believe that by September 2021, when Netanyahu's term as Prime Minister ends and Gantz is scheduled to succeed him, disagreements between them will have reached such a stage that will make another election unavoidable. Netanyahu hopes that if he can maintain current trends, the right-wing bloc will win and he will regain the premiership. All that, of course, if he succeeds in achieving immunity from impending prosecution or indeed acquittal from all charges. The actions of General Gantz appear to be more sincere than those of Netanyahu. Gantz split from his more militant anti-Netanyahu co-founders because he believes that at this critical time the country's interest supersedes that of party politics. If anything is like chess, it's the power game in Israel. I wonder how it will play out.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Gantz believes the country's interest supersedes that of party politics. More about that in the next program. I am Walter Bingham and find it deplorable that the President of the State of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, did not care for the health and safety of his family when he hosted his daughter, and it is said her partner and her children, in his home for the Seder night against a strict regulation that nobody was allowed to leave their home until the next morning. This regulation was made to preempt close contact with family members. My question, why did he not adhere to the safety regulations? Did he not care for the health of his family? He is supposed to be the role model for the nation, many of whom, like I, adhered to the instructions and celebrated Seder night alone by ourselves. But this is Israel, with one law for those in position of power and quite another for the ordinary people. The president's apology did nothing to mitigate his offense. But that was not the only time that President Rivlin, who is at the top of our leadership hierarchy, ignored the instructions of the Ministry of Health. At some of his meetings, which because of COVID-19 he holds in his garden, he and his interlocutors sat much closer together around the coffee table than the prescribed 2 meters, as seen in pictures. Only just a week ago, we commemorated Israel's Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah.
And what follows is the story of one of the main perpetrators of the Nazi policy to exterminate all Jews. I am Walter Bingham, and if you are squeamish, take a Valium. There are some locations in the world that conjure up images of cruel events long gone by. Foremost among them is the world's largest amphitheater, the Colosseum in Rome, where some Christian martyrs are said to have been fed to the lions in front of an audience of tens of thousands. By the way, the building of that edifice was begun in the year 70 of the Common Era, immediately after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem by the Romans. It is said to have been financed from the Jewish temple's treasures. Almost 2,000 years later, another name has become a byword for unspeakable atrocities, this time by the Germans and their followers, who succeeded to trump even the barbarities of the Inquisitions. They chose a location near the small Polish town of Auschwitz, already mentioned in the annals of the year 1179. Its German name became a paradigm for the series of locations where the greatest ever mass murders in history have been committed. Auschwitz, the extermination camp where 1.5 million innocent Jewish men, women and children and others were murdered by Cyclone B, a poisonous gas originally manufactured as a cyanide-based pesticide, and where their bodies were then burned after anything useful was first salvaged. It was carried out, as Bernice Rubens so aptly wrote in her book The Brothers, with sublime and obscene efficiency. Mass murder where not a minute is lost. Mass burial where nothing is wasted. Human skin for reading lamps. Human flesh for soap. Human hair for pillows. Man's teeth for investment. No waste. It's a system meticulous in every detail, long premeditated, planned and coordinated, administered with the most sophisticated and satanic technology. In the whole history of murdering men, among all its victimized peoples, there has never been a more accomplished, a more ingenious, a more cunning or more terrible
cavalcade
of cruelty. On January 27th, the free world
has once again commemorated
International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That date
was the 75th
anniversary of the liberation of this factory of death. Responsible for all that was the Commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf, who carried the rank of SS Obersturmbannführer, equivalent to Lieutenant Colonel. He once told his brother-in-law, "Look at these people, they are different from us, they look different, and they don't behave like humans. They are here to die." Following his trial in Frankfurt, Germany, and conviction of crimes against humanity, he was taken to Auschwitz, the place of his mass murders, and there, outside the crematorium number 1, he was executed by hanging on Wednesday, the 16th of April, 1947, at 10 in the morning. He was 46 years old, and according to reports, his death throes were considerably shorter and less agonizing than those of the people whom he sent into the gas chambers. How does a person live with the realization that he is the grandson of a 1,000,000 times mass murderer? What is it like to carry the name at which everyone immediately thinks of the pictures of emaciated, piled-up heaps of corpses in the Auschwitz concentration camp? How can one accept this as part of one's own identity? Something that does not disappear, but rather remains and raises questions. To answer these and other questions, I'm pleased to welcome on the telephone from his home in Germany, Rainer Höss, the grandson of the infamous Auschwitz Commandant. He is described by Israeli journalist Eldad Beck as a tormented soul, torn between personal responsibility and family insanity. His situation is like a Gordian knot, which is a problem solvable only by bold action. And we shall today discover how Rainer Höss did exactly that when we talk about his book, translated from the German, The Inheritance of the Commandant. Welcome to the program, Mr. Höss.
Thanks for inviting me in your radio show, Walter.
I think for the avoidance of confusion, we should immediately establish when you were born.
I was born in 1965 in Germany.
So during all your early post-war childhood, you must have spent a lot of time with Hedwig, your grandmother, and your uncles. What did they tell you about your grandfather?
I don't spend so much time with my grandmother. I think I saw her in the years I can remember myself. Only 5-6 times, not more. She lived far away from us with my youngest aunt, Annegret, and my uncle I saw many times, and he was a very cute and friendly guy. But they never talk about what happened at Auschwitz or what happened at all with our family history.
So how did you get to know about it, and how old were you then?
I was in a boarding school. My parents had a lot of trouble at home, so my father was a very dominant guy, deeply influenced by the ideology of the Nazi regime. And so they sent me to a boarding school. Well, it was like my mom tried to get some suicides 10 times. She was so under pressure from my father. It was like a dictatorship at home. Everything we had to do was on his behalf. He gave the instruction and we had to obey and follow. No other chance for us to get our own life in that time when he was the head of the family. So they sent me to this boarding school.
But at that age, it must have been difficult to comprehend what you now learned about your grandfather, because to judge by my experiences, it must have seemed a long time ago. I mean, I remember well when my mother told me some episodes from World War I when I was about 9, only 15 years after the end of the war, and it seemed to me like 100 years ago, so it must have been difficult to understand that.
Oh, of course. But in the age of 12, you're not really interested in Second World War or in the crimes. Well, it was the time in Germany where nobody was spoken about it. So it was under the cupboard. Yeah, it was a secret in Germany to talk about the World War and involvement of the Germans in such a huge activity in genocide.
That's genocide.
It was a heavy stuff in Germany. In the schools as well, they don't teach about the Second World War until the 80s, when we start getting up again and talk about the Second World War. Many of the family members died in that time, so a lot of witnesses were lost in families. And it was in my age when I growing up, it was very difficult to get information from the family.
When you spoke about your grandfather with Hedwig, with your grandmother, by what name did you refer to him?
In the first time I said grandfather. Well, I was not aware of what happened with him.
Yeah, but you heard about it once you knew about it.
Yeah, of course. But it was not easy for me. So I have to tell you a little bit about how I know about the family history.
You come from a long line of observant Catholics. Tell me some more about your upbringing.
But I'm not religious at all. I was in a church until I get married. And after it, I went immediately out of the church and never went in. So I not believe in God and I not believe in church. Well, they were also involved in all the crimes and the genocide in the Second World War. If they deny it or not, they were involved. A lot of documents confess that in any way.
You're talking about the church.
Yeah. My father as well was not a religious guy. He hates religious and he hates all these pastors. And he said sometimes to my religion teacher, when he works against my father with information about me and that I was not obey and things like that, that his father, that means Rudolf Höss, forgot to bring him to Auschwitz. So my father, in that time, he hates priests, religious, and he hates Jews more than other things.
By the way, where's your father now? You in contact with him?
No. I canceled the contact to my family in 1985. I'm not interested to have any contact to the family, especially to my father. Well, he is a liar and he is so deeply influenced from the Nazi ideology. He is part of a German Nazi party called NPD and he never comes back to a normal life. So he denies the Holocaust and he glorifies the activities of his father. And many times he said, it was such a good life at Auschwitz. They had everything, and the Jews and the Allies took everything away.
But how can he deny the Holocaust when he spent some of his formative years living in that villa within the camp and unbelievably just 150 meters from the crematorium, which will surely have an influence on him?
That would be a good question to ask him, but I'm really not interested to get in touch with him.
Is he still alive?
I think so. Well, in Germany we have the rules, if someone out of the family dies, you get an information. So I never received any message from a notar, so I think he is still alive.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
Is he still alive?
I think so.
Would be interesting to talk with him.
Maybe I don't know where he went to. It was not interesting for me the last 20 years.
I take it that your curiosity about your Opa, that's the grandfather, I think that's what you called him at that time, was now aroused, and you asked your father or grandmother, Hedwig, what did they tell you?
The first time was after my experience in the boarding school. So I asked her when I was 16 or 17 years old about him, and she said, you didn't understand that. It was a completely other time, so it is not important for you to know it. He was a good soldier, he was a behaved father, and we loved him, and the Allies and the Jews took him away from us. So he got hanged for things 1,000 other people done the same, and the only guy who was for all the crimes, it was Heinrich Himmler. So he took all that stuff far away from him. He glorified him. He put him on a stage in such a way, it was unbelievable for me.
Himmler was the leader of the SS and the Gestapo and, of course, the police. So who was the source of your knowledge if your family didn't tell you much?
I get more knowledge in that time when I was in touch or realized that one of these grandfathers, I called him my grandfather, Leopold Heger. I was not aware that he was the driver of my grandfather at the time at Auschwitz. He was a nice guy, but also as well, he was deeply a Nazi until his end. And he told me all the stories about my grandfather when he was riding out with his horses in the morning, how strange he was, how he follows order by order and looks only for good stuff, that all the solutions and everything works straight and works correct. And I think on the other hand, he had the hope that I get also influenced by his ideology and follow him for a better German Fourth Reich.
You found out in your late teens that your grandfather was also a member, in fact the leader of a gang that committed a cruel murder of a suspected communist in their midst, and other members were Martin Bormann, who later became the head of the party chancellery and Hitler's private secretary. So your grandfather has served 5 years of a 10-year sentence. How did that make you feel?
Oh, very, 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 very sad and angry on the other side. When I realized and saw the first time the pictures and have a little bit knowledge about what happened, what calls Auschwitz. In the age of 12, you have no idea what is Auschwitz. And in that time, Auschwitz never called Auschwitz, it called Auschwitz. So it was absolutely confusing for me in that age to realize that Auschwitz and Auschwitz is the same place which all the cruels and the suffering and the crimes took place, which my grandfather was responsible for.
Well, Auschwitz is the Polish name.
Right. And if you went on a map, you don't find Auschwitz. So in Germany, all the maps with the name Auschwitz were immediately moved away, and it calls again, like the Polish name, Auschwitz.
Aha. Your grandfather seemed to become more radical in prison when he joined the what was called Arterman League, an agrarian movement dedicated to a
blood and soil-inspired ruralism and racial purity, intent on expansion to the east. That later served as a kind of old boys network. How did that influence your father?
This kind of past in his family didn't really influence him. But to be very close to nature, like animals, like the forest, like the hills, he was very close. That's the only thing I'm sure he was influenced about it. It is also a part of me that I'm very close to nature. So I love it to walk around in the hills, to have silence there and think about a lot of details in my life when I'm alone walking there.
I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your father. Was he unrepentant? How did he react, for instance, when he read some of the notes which his father, the Auschwitz Commandant, your grandfather, wrote about his activities and feelings? Like, for instance, he wrote, "I have to say honestly that gassing had a calming effect on me, as we now have soon to begin the mass extermination of Jews. I always dreaded the hostage executions and mass shootings. Now I felt better that we were spared from the bloodbath." It's a remarkably cold and calculated attitude. It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
When your father read that, did he say anything?
No, I never saw my father read things like that. It was an unspoken secret in my family. I can give you a sample. When I was 15, I saw in our library the book, The Commandant of Auschwitz. And when I saw the name Hearst, I want to grab it, and my father came out of his home office and took that book immediately away and said, "It is nothing for you to read." So it was done. It was finished. And I asked my mom and said, "Is there any chance to read that book?" And she said, "Yes, of course, but you have to wait until your father will leave us for 4 or 5 days. He has meetings outside of Germany, so you have a chance to read it." And I get the book and I read it overnight, and I was so angry. I was so scared about all the details, his cold memoirs, his testimonies, and how he explained such a genocide in such cold words. And there was nothing about the victims. It was only how I can establish things for my soldiers that they not get crazy after all these mass shootings. So, and we found a way for gassing, and we are all happy about it. So, but you didn't read anything about the victims, how people suffering under his control or his activities and solutions.
You said he went away for a few days at times. What was his business? What did he do?
He was a distributor, seller for a very, very popular car company like Volvo, and went many times out for meeting people. He also meets comrades of the old regime. In our house, in and out daily.
What kind of relationship did you have with your grandmother, Hedwig? That's the wife of the commandant. And how did she feel about her husband's activities?
I don't have a good relationship to her in the time she was alive. She made suicide in 1989. So I really not liked her very much. She was such a lady. When she comes inside the room, all the people stopped immediately talking. It was, you went into a freezer. She was such a dominant person. The same dictatorship I had with my father. She comes in and she dominates the room in all ways.
And was it ever established why she committed suicide?
I only have the information from my mom and other people who were involved in our family that she said many, many times in her life that she grows up with a star. And when the time comes and that she went down with a star, I think it's about the Third Reich, the Nazi regime, and that all that establishment never come back. So she will end her life. And she used the cyanide capsules.
Really? That's almost like Magda Goebbels, the wife of the propaganda minister, who couldn't live without Hitler, apparently.
Right. My grandmother was so deeply influenced, I cannot explain it in English.
Did you ever ask her what happened to her husband, to the commandant?
Yes. I think it was only 1 or 2 times. And the last time I met her, I was 19. And I asked her, and she said, "I don't talk to you. You are not really a member of the family. You are more a traitor than a family member. And if you ask or talk about hers, I will not accept you as my grandson. That was the last time I was in touch with her.
So you were at that time already openly talking against the family history?
Yeah, of course.
Now, she lived a luxurious life in her villa among culture evenings and coffee afternoons with film stars and famous artists, yet within earshot of the sounds and smells of the factory of death. Did that never bother her?
No. I think Auschwitz was, for my grandmom, a huge warehouse. And she used it in so many ways. I received a lot of documents where she ordered things at the part of Canada, the warehouse where the belongings of the Jews get stored there.
Canada is the name for that warehouse.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I saw it as well. It was another warehouse called Mexico. Nobody really knows why the Nazis give these storages such a name. On one hand, we hate the Allies like the Americans. On the other hand, they gave the names of their storage American or Mexican names.
Applying the principle of proverbial German order, maybe Canada held the winter clothing and Mexico the warmer things.
So it's stupid. Okay. All the ideology was stupid.
You wrote in your book that your grandmother instructed the children in the villa to wash the strawberries because of the ash, which also served as fertilizer for her favorite flower beds. Ash of people, fertilizer for the flower beds. Did you spend time with her as a child? And if so, what kind of a grandmother was she? And what did she say? I keep coming back to that question. What did she say about the Nazi era?
She never spoke about the Nazi era. It was the same system like my father had in our family. We only had to obey her instructions. And when my parents went out for some days or a couple of days to have meetings where they get invited by the business of my father, she was there. But it was not so many times. I think it was 2 or 3 times in my life when she has to look about us. So normally she never looked about her grandchild. Well, she hated.
You mean looking after the grandchildren? Take care.
It was not important for her. She said many times that it was a system in her life that when her children earn money, they have to pay for her life. Mm-hmm. And she used the last letters of my grandfather to the child where he wrote, "Take care of your mom. Help her. It will be a hard time after the war. So take care of her. And she is a good mom," and all that stuff. And she used these letters to control her child's.
By child, he means children.
In such a horrible ways that they paid for her life. She never worked. She never had a job. So I asked myself many, many times how she can live such a luxury life after the Second World War without an income.
Stay tuned. More after this break.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentakoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
And now, here is Walter Bingham.
I asked myself many, many times how she can live such a luxury life after the Second World War without an income.
Well, there could have been neo-Nazi organizations.
I'm sure the silent help of Himmler's daughter flows money in several channels of Nazi families.
I'm in conversation with Rainer Höss, the grandson of the infamous Commandant of Auschwitz. What about her friends? Did anybody want to associate with her?
Oh, there are many. These were friends, I call them old comrades of the Hess family.
Uh-huh.
She did not have really new friends. It was only old friends. They met her in Auschwitz. And I saw it when we went to Leopold Heger, the driver of Rudolf Hess, when we met him. And it was such a bad feeling for me. When he had a birthday, we went there, and it was 1 or 2 times that my grandmother was going with us. And we were going in his living room. Leo was sitting there, and my grandmother came in. Leo immediately jumped out of his chair, stands up. It looks like he was like a servant. All his time, and he said, Miss Hers, he never said Hedwig to her.
I see.
That was incredible for me. He said, Miss Hers.
I see.
But she said to him, not Mr. Hager. She called it with a nickname, Leo, and said everything is fine. Then she sit down. He was like a gentleman servant, went in the back of the chair, helped her to get the chair under her ass.
But who paid him? When he was the driver, he got treated very well. He had lots of money, no doubt. But who paid him now?
He worked for German companies.
I see.
So he never went on trial. He only was a witness in the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials in the 60s. But he never get judged by his activities. He was not a high-ranking SS officers, and after the wartime and all that trials, the lowest SS guys never get on trial.
And there was an arrest category, but depending on his rank.
Yeah, his last rank was a Rottenführer.
I see.
That's one below the lowest arrest category for SS.
It's a very small rank.
You talk very little about your mother. What was it like in your home?
My mom was a person, her life was like living under a cheese clock. It is when you have a plate and you put cheese on it and you put something over it so the fly is like a cheese cover. So she was completely out of order in any ways, and she was depressed. So she starts to use some pills many years. And she gets beaten by my father many times, and I saw it myself. So it was very, very bad for me to see it when my father beaten my mom or stick her down the steps in the house, and she was blooding out of the nose. Yeah, it was horrible. But in the time when my parents married, it was you follow your husband until the end. In good and bad times, you know all that stuff, what the church give out. So that was the way she adults all the beatings and the suffering under his control. And when my father, it's a sample. When you have a white wall, my father said, it is a red wall. And he said, no, it's a white wall. You get slapped and you said, you're right, it's a red wall.
You describe your feelings toward your Uncle Klaus, that's your father's oldest brother, and you excused his actions towards the prisoners despite his Nazi sympathies. Why? Was it your later strict German upbringing, your elders know best, do what you're told, or else, as you describe?
He was a friendly guy. I had a chance to sit on his knees. He was joking around with us, so we had a lot of fun with him. I never had that with my father. So he was more open. In that time, I was not aware which kind of crimes or activities he made at Auschwitz. But in my youth, he was a friendly uncle, brings a lot of presents with us, was joking with us. And he was that kind of father I wish I had.
We see him in pictures in the villa in Auschwitz wearing uniform.
Yeah, it was a present of Heinrich Himmler when he visited the camp in 1942.
Himmler gave a present to your uncle?
To all the childs. They receive every time presents when they met Heinrich Himmler. What people don't know is that the friendship between my grandfather and Himmler was long before Hitler raises to power.
I see.
So I have pictures where Himmler was in the Arteman League as well. And they met, I think before my grandfather went to jail, they have meetings. Himmler was a chicken farmer. But I have a picture where Himmler and Hess are standing beside each other in 1928.
Then there is also your Aunt Brigitte, your father's sister, who lived in the US and didn't even tell her children about her past in Auschwitz. What do you know about her?
I know that she is very close to one of the biggest Holocaust deniers called Dr. Furison. And I found out a lot of details where she gave him some family pictures to give him the chance to deny the Holocaust or the existing of mass killings there. And when you see it on his video clip on YouTube, he especially said, this lady, and I know my aunt from the pictures and I know her personally, and he put the finger on it and stuck on it and said, from this lady, I will not give you the name of her. I received all the documents so I can explain to you that the Holocaust is a hoax and was never existing at Auschwitz. So it is the biggest lie from the Jewish to get a control over the world. What a kind of stupid.
This is most amazing, this denial of the Holocaust by people who lived within 150 meters of the chimney.
Yeah, it scares me. It's unbelievable for me that my own aunt not learned out of history. She was part of it, and she was not so young in that time when she lived at Auschwitz. She has a nice life, and we saw it on many pictures I have about it, where she's jumping around, loving and have fun. And they also used the prisoners as a servant. It was normal for these children. We cannot blame the children for the activities of their fathers and the mother, of course.
Yeah.
Can blame her in such a way that she not learned out of history and that she denies the Holocaust, that she works with Holocaust deniers so close and not even tell her own children what happened with her grandfather.
Mr. Hirsch, I dare say they found out in the end. But many prisoners worked in the Hirsch villa, according to your information. Was it a sought-after job, or were people with particular skills forced to exercise them for the benefit of the family?
Yes, of course. But they also used only Jehovah's Witness. My grandmother, or especially my grandfather, only had Jehovah's Witness as servant in the villa.
Not Jews?
No, only Jehovah's Witness.
Wonder why that is.
I think in a religious way, they obey, they never lie, and they never stolen things.
So was Joseph Paczynski, about whom you write, also a Jehovah's Witness? And tell me about it.
No. He was a Polish Jew. But he was the only one who was able to cut my grandfather's hair in the beginning. So he was working at a druggist in the store where you can buy all these perfumes and get shaved and all that stuff for the SS guys. And on some day, my grandfather asked for a barber.
Mm-hmm.
So he was never a barber, Joseph Paczynski. He was a metal worker.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts learning to cut hairs at Auschwitz. It was another way to escape.
Did you survive?
Yeah, of course. I met him in 2010 at Krakow in the old synagogue.
Really?
And I have a long meeting with him.
He must have told you a few stories about the life.
Horrible stories. How it was in the beginning that my grandfather, in the first 1 or 2 years, not talk with him. He comes in the morning, shaved his face, cut his hair, and went out. But I asked him as the barber, you have the chance when you shave him, your knife was so close to him, you could kill him. And he said, okay, but it will not bring success to kill him. It was like a Hydra system. So when I kill this commandant, another, maybe more cruel commandant will raise his chair and I will get killed. And a lot of people in the camp get killed immediately as well.
In the course of your research and investigations, you met a number of Auschwitz survivors like Paczynski.
Yeah.
How did you decide your conduct toward them? How to greet them and how to talk to them? That must have been difficult.
Oh, yeah, it was a long way to get in touch. I sent many emails, I sent many letters, I tried to call them many times. And I think they were scary about my name. I was scary what happened when they pick up the phone or send me back an email. And I met them. I got the chance to meet them. And it was a great feeling not to get the information that you were not there and you didn't do it. That was as well a good feeling for me.
Mm-hmm.
Get more activities to not go away of my path, to follow my way, but to hear the stories, to see that people escaped that horror which my grandfather established. It was such a great feeling. I'm sorry for all these people who get killed there. And I know many, many families get destroyed. And many of these survivors also had a lot of problems, mental problems, after all that stuff they have to bear in Auschwitz.
You were criticized by a German journalist as insensitive and arrogant when on one occasion you faced a survivor just staring at him while chewing gum. Strong words from a fellow German.
Sorry when I'm laughing. If these people can walk in my shoes, that will be great. If I can lend them my shoes, my history, all the guilt I have to bear in my family, they never would say things like that. I was so nervous to meet survivors in a land where the survivors have a place to grow up, to settle down, to establish them, like Israel. And it was the time when I met the students from Hitler's Children film in Israel. It was in Nahalal, near the Sea of Galilee. And I was sitting there in the office surrounded by survivors, surrounded by Jewish Israeli people. And I only forgotten to take out that chewing gum. It was not a mess against the survivors. And I asked these survivors after this lady spread out these horrible, horrible sentence. Maybe you are interesting. I have a tattoo on my chest, which calls Never Forget. And it includes 3 numbers of survivors. It's a permanent tattoo. And the last number I tattooed in is the number of Eva Moses Kor, one of the twin survivors of the Mengele experiments. Josef Paczynski's number is on my chest as well, and the number of Shmuel Zuk. He was one of the survivors I met at the Nahalal High School. So I was only nervous. And if people cannot imagine how it is as the grandson of a million contracted mass murder to sit in the country where the survivors settle down, found against a place where they get not beaten by Nazis or get free and establish their own life, I don't know what to say about it.
When you go swimming and people see this tattoo, do you get asked what it is?
Yeah, of course. In the area I live, people know exactly who I am. It is not a secret who I am. I was last year in 70 schools in Germany. I have a lot of Skype meetings with English and American schools. So it is a full-time job I do. And if people ask me what happens with that tattoo, I explained it. And most of the people, they get very silent and said, oh my goodness. It is my way to live with that. I know I have not to bear any guilt. I was not there. I was not alive in that time. But the history and the atrocities in my family, only to know it, has changed my life completely. It's a 360 turnaround.
You had some more criticism. On another occasion, you contacted Yad Vashem and offered to sell some personal belongings of your grandfather, which did not go down well with Yad Vashem. And when challenged, you said that Yad Vashem approached you. What's the truth?
I never contacted Yad Vashem Israel or Jerusalem. I was in touch with Yad Vashem. It's an organization in Berlin, and I'm not over it. I asked it. I have belongings of my grandfather. I explained my name, so I was not like a dealer. And I made that mistake. It was not clear what I want, really. And I got punished and beaten in the internet, in the media. But right now, I think people can see that it was not an offer in such a way. So I don't know why people always look about the bad things, what people like I do, and not looking what kind of good things we are doing.
Well, there's more of the same. You also blamed the son of another Nazi as the person who advised you to do that, to sell these things. But you did not supply proof. One of your former good acquaintances, Eldad Beck, published all this in Yediot Achronot, a large circulation newspaper in Israel, where he accused you of lying. Did you sue him?
Maybe that question would be better on the side of Hanoch Sebi. He is the director and the producer of Hitler's Children. Maybe you ask him what is true and what is a lie. So if someone like Eldad Beck went in the evening to a class of students, what I get informed later on when the screening was done, and I met these students from Israel at Auschwitz for the screening of Hitler's Children, and they told me when I was in Israel that he came to the students and to the teachers and give them some newspapers, put it in plastic so if it's raining, they get not destroyed. And they should hold high these newspapers to blame me in such a way. Do you think it is correct? It is fine to do things like that?
Well, you didn't sue him, even though he accused you of trying to profit from your family's villainous past, as he calls it.
I never had any profit out of that business. I spent my own money, and believe me, I can tell you, right now, I not earned more than 20,000 euros in all the time I do that job. And mostly of that money I spent for organizations about cancer, for young people. And my last interview, it was on the SVR. It's a very popular German radio and TV station. I spent that money for childhood.
A couple more of this before we come back to the story.
But I don't know why you ask me now a lot of these things. It's coming up all the time that people always see what is bad, what I have bad done. It is not bad to ask questions, but people only want to hurt me. I don't know why.
Well, you wrote yourself about some of those things. Let me just ask you a couple more questions on that before we get back to the story. He also claims that you told him you were once a senior member of a European neo-Nazi group and you still maintain contact with them. What do you say to that?
No. I got many offers from Nazi leaders, but I never was part of it. And it's normal if you have such a name and your father, your own family siblings are involved in Nazi parties, they will get you on their side. That's normal. Mm-hmm. And I had no help. And if someone called me friend like he did in the past and stick the knife in my back, I think that it's much more bad than things I have done. I made mistakes, but I'm a human being. I'm not a computer or machine. I made bad things, but in behalf of him, I said sorry. And I said it many times for stupid things I done. And it was only one time, it was to offer it to this organization in Berlin. That was the only mistake, the only fault in my life. And I get hurt about this now years.
Someone who listens to all this would say, that's strange that he didn't sue the person. What does that indicate if he didn't sue these accusations which he calls are lies?
I forgive him. I never would talking about him. I never bring that on top in all of my studies or education or talking with other people. Maybe he made a mistake, I made a mistake, okay. But if I go deeper all the time inside, I'm wasting time for very important things.
One last question on that subject is that another accusation is that you are motivated by pure opportunism, using your last name as a tool for seeking fortune and glory. Of course, you're not responsible for the crimes and actions of your grandfather and the rest of your family, writes Beck, but for your own, and they are unforgivable.
Do you think my grandfather is such a VIP that I use that name in such a way? Use my name in such a way for opportunism to make money with it. Believe me, I would be a millionaire, but I'm really not. It would be very important to have a communication with Eva Moses Kor. She adopted me as her grandson June this summer when we were together at Auschwitz.
Who's the lady who adopted you?
She is a survivor of the twin experiments of Josef Mengele at Auschwitz.
Okay, back to the story. Why did you not tell your wife about your family history so that she found out by chance?
No, my mom didn't know about it. My wife and my children knows everything from the first minute I met her.
When did you visit Auschwitz for the first time?
It was 2009, after I get a call from Thomas Harding. He was the nephew of Hans Alexander. Maybe the book is known, Hans and Alexander. It's very popular, a bestseller in the world. When they caught my grandfather, he was one of the field security section members of the British. And he asked if it would be possible to meet each other and travel together to Auschwitz. And I said, of course. I took my mom. Eldad Beck was involved and Thomas Harding was involved. And we went 2009 to Auschwitz by car. And Thomas Harding organized the hotel rooms and all that stuff. And we went there and it was a horrible trip. Horrible on one hand to see the camp, to see the huge area which my grandfather creates. And on the other hand, to have that problem that the police there and the people there, when they know who I am, I'm immediately in trouble. So they think I'm the new Nazi and only glorify my grandfather and put down some flowers on his gallows. I checked in a small hotel opposite the main camp. We went in, I put my passport and my credit card on the desk. And the lady was completely shocked when she saw my name. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it. I was so far away from everything to be at Auschwitz. And Thomas Harding sticks me and said, she was on the internet, it looks about your name. So they were aware I'm the grandson. Mm-hmm. And there were 1 or 2 articles in front of me getting out from Eldad Beck. Uh-huh. And then the lady said to me, it is not possible for us to give you a room under your name. So you can imagine how that feels.
Why did you not change your name, Mr.
No.
Hirsch? Why did you all this time retain your name when you know it's so troublesome? I can understand that your grandmother would never have changed her name, but you obviously believe it to be an advantage to be a Hirsch. In fact, you said that people who believe that you want to be noticed are right.
I think to use that name in a good way, it's better than to ignore it. And what Eva Moses Kor said, in the last meeting we had in Terre Haute a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at the University of Indiana. So she said to use that name with such negative history for good things, and I'm sure I use it for good things, is the best way you could take it.
I suppose when you were first in Auschwitz, nobody can understand your feelings, your thoughts, indeed your emotions on that occasion.
They don't walk in my shoes.
Can you give us an idea just exactly how you felt when you first set foot on that camp?
You get scared. Normally, and I said it many times, normally I grew up as a very controlled person. So it was not allowed in my family or in my youth to be out of control. So to cry or things like that was such a huge problem, a fault. I get beaten about it. So then you went in such a camp, and it was, I don't know how to explain it, to cross the gate, Arbeit macht frei. It needs long, many times to go across that sign. And then I was there, and it was a feeling that my grandfather was spooky around there all the time. So it was such a bad experience for me, a feeling, I cannot describe it to you.
I understand.
I don't know how to explain it, to cross the gate, Arbeit macht frei. It needs long, many times to go across that sign. And then I was there, and it was a feeling that my grandfather was spooky around there all the time. So it was such a bad experience for me, a feeling, I cannot describe it to you.
I understand. Now, if someone would ask me what I had done had I been confronted with Rudolf Hirsch, the commandant of Auschwitz, I could easily and without hesitation have said, kill him, of course. Although, when I was sitting alone in a room with the Nazi foreign minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was the first to be subsequently hanged for war crimes and crimes against humanity, I conducted the interview without even verbal violence. So when during your visit to Auschwitz you were once asked by a young Israeli girl, if you met your grandfather today, what would you do? You replied, kill him. Why did you regret that reply?
I think I was in a situation out of control myself, and I hated not to be controlled. Well, I'm open for people. They can stuck things in me. They can be aggressive against me, and it hurts. But I was in such a situation out of control. So I saw me standing there in front, and it was the only answer it comes up in that second. And I not regret what I said. I would put it in another form. That is what it means. And it is Hippocratic,
Hypothetical.
To meet my grandfather, it never will happen. So when I kill him, I'm on the same level like he. I never used any weapons. I never killed anybody. It was like a cowboy slang. Maybe I feel good in that way to tell the people how I feel. It was the only way to explain my emotions. Everybody knows exactly what happened with me in that second.
On the other hand, you worked for 9 years in the spray booth of a Mercedes workshop where you frequently heard Heil Hitler and where your manager was subsequently arrested as a Nazi, and you admit that you stayed because the money was good. That's not a recommendation for the views you advocate today, is it?
Yeah, but it is a huge company. We have a lot of migrant people there, like Turkish, Greece, Italians, Spanish, Mexican, Argentines. So, and it was only one guy, and everybody was laughing about him. Well, he was a stupid guy. Nobody respect him for his announcements, when he comes in. I saw it as well when I was in Israel. A lot of people there talking about so nicely about the Second World War and Hitler. And they made more jokes And I was sitting there in Israel and listened to Jewish people who made jokes about Jewish and the Holocaust. I was shocked.
Well, Jews are known for being able to laugh about themselves and make jokes about themselves, which would most probably be deemed to be anti-Semitic, would they be said by non-Jews.
Yeah, but I ignored this guy, you know. For me, it was not the level I had friends. So when he comes in and said, Heil Hitler, okay, never mind. Stupid people, you cannot change their minds.
Then there were people who wanted to rub shoulders with you, like someone called Michael Kühnen, who greeted you with the words, I am pleased to meet the grandson of the Commandant of Auschwitz, and who wanted to recruit you to some underground neo-Nazi group. Did you not enjoy that attention, and how did you respond?
No, I not like it, that people come across like Kühnen. He was a neo-Nazi, and it was in my youth. I was about 18, 19 years old when he knocks on my door. He was a comrade of my father. He only knows about me, about my father. So I was not in media at that time. And I hate things like that. And I listened to him a few minutes, and then I smashed him out and said, move away. I never will be part of such activities or parties and things like that.
That brought some unfortunate consequences. Can you tell me about those?
Oh, yes. They blowed away my letterbox in front of the house. They crashed it down. They sent me pictures of my kids where the eyes of my kids were cut out and you had a red cross against their face. For me, it was like a death list, you know. Mm-hmm. I was very, very scared and angry, and I called the police and give all that stuff to the police. Maybe I need help in such way. They crashed down my brakes on the car. They made swastikas on my car with a spray. It was a huge impact, and I had a lot of trouble inside my own family. Like my wife said, what happened with all that rubbish? What people think? Why you are in contact with these people? Why you allow that they knock on our door? I never asked them to knock on my door.
From these consequences and other stories, it's evident that among Germans in public, it's not unusual, even if shocking, to talk about the Nazi era. But criticize the old order in private circles, the social underground, so to speak, and you are branded by people you would never suspect as one who fouls the nest. So writes the psychiatrist in the epilogue to your book. But you admit that you cannot totally rid yourself of this mass murderer in your family history. The impression he left on your soul is too deep-seated, you said. Do you mean, after all, he was your grandfather?
No, he was Rudolf Höss. He never was my grandfather. He was Rudolf Höss. He was a mass murderer. And as this person, you never will see me talking many times about he is my grandfather. Mostly I use the name Rudolf Höss. And when you went on Twitter, you will see it. I use it as well, Rudolf Höss. I made my own distance to him. He is a part of my family history, okay. But I never met him. I never sit on his knees. I never knew. Only thing I knew from him was reading the documents, reading his memoirs, and saw what happened in my family with the denying the Holocaust. That was incredible for me. And that is why I'm very active against all these new Nazis, old Nazis. And right now, I'm proud to be part of a lawyer team from Berlin. They right now bring Oskar Gröning on trial. He was the cashier of Auschwitz. And they asked me to be part of it, that they can use my documentation I have about Auschwitz and my grandfather and the testimonies and other documents to be safe, that everything what this guy said is a lie. And I said, of course, I will help you to bring him on trial. I'm sure he never went in jail like Demaniuk, all these Nazi comrades. But to face his name in a trial and to judge him brings not back the millions of killed people. It is a stepstone in build bridges and show the world that all these victims are not forgotten.
I know that by trade you are a cook.
Right.
But what else do you do these days? You're concerned with the prosecution of that Nazi criminal, and I know you talk somewhere, but what else do you do these days?
I give education lessons, and I'm involved in a very interesting project of Mark Elvin Barbai. His mom and his grandparents were survivors of Theresienstadt. So he's a photographer. So he made an image series in black and white. You can see it on the internet. And it calls Mongrels, in German Mischlinge.
Mongrel, that's for dogs, really.
So that's the title of his image series. So he shows like a picture series of different people in Germany on historical places of the Nazis. He lives in New York as a photographer and a journalist, and comes to Germany and asks, can we make some black and white pictures of you? I said, of course you can. We went to Buchenwald. That project is so amazing. Well, it shows that this kind of Aryan race and original German heritage never exist and never will be exist. We are mixed. All people are mixed.
Absolutely. My wife was blonde and blue-eyed.
It was a fanatic ideology.
How old are your children, Mr. Hess? And what have you told them, and how are they taking it?
I have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. I'm in a very good contact. We're met many times a week. When they grow up and they understand what happened with the Second World War, and normally it comes when they were in the 8th class, it means about an age of 14 to 15. My oldest son, he is 32, and his teacher in that time asked me and said, I know you're the grandson of a mass murder of the Commandant of Auschwitz. Would you come into school and give some lectures about it? And I said, of course I will. So my children are well educated about what happened in our family. And my path for my children, that they not grow up in such a silent, dominated atmosphere from the Second World War. They know everything about it. And if people ask them, are you the daughter or the son of Rainer Höss? And I said, yes, of course. We are proud of our dad and his work against Forgotten, and the work he did against the new Nazis and all that growing up against anti-Semitic and racist and homophobia in the world.
You know more about your grandfather than most who are living today. Why do you think that 4 days before he was executed, he sent a message to the state prosecutor, including these comments, and I quote, "My conscience compels me to make the following declaration. In the solitude of my prison cell, I have come to the bitter recognition that I have sinned gravely against humanity. As Commandant of Auschwitz, I was responsible for carrying out part of the cruel plans of the Third Reich for human destruction. In so doing, I have inflicted terrible wounds on humanity. I caused unspeakable suffering for the Polish people in particular. I am to pay for this with my life. May the Lord God forgive one day what I have done." Do you think that someone who committed such unspeakable crimes can have a conscience? Because the conduct of his wife, your grandmother, who lived until she committed suicide, did not indicate a similar regret. Was it a sudden fear of God, because it also reported before his execution he returned to the Catholic Church and received the sacrament of penance from Friar Vladislav Lon, the priest of the Polish province of the Society of Jesus, and on the next day the same priest administered to him Holy Communion as Vaticum, the last rites before death? What do you think went on in his head?
Nobody knows what happened in his head in that moment. So I never found an answer for these sentences he wrote down or his commitment he made. The only answer I can give myself, it is not the public meanings, it's my own answer of it. When people come and knows exactly that they get hanged, I think they change sometimes their minds in such a way that they have fear, that they are scared about the death. That's the only answer I can give myself. When I read that answer many times as well in the book of Manfred Deseles, the priest from Auschwitz, the German priest which lived there and made good things there. He wrote a book as well about my grandfather, like a religious book. It's half of his memoirs, and the other side is about God and Höss. And he found parts of it, but also not really an answer what happens in that few days before in the life of my grandfather. He was never religious in any ways. Well, if he was religious, he never killed people. Normally, if he was such a religion, like he grows up, like his father, he was oh my goodness, he was a Catholic through and through. And he lives the Bible. But what happened in my grandfather's head in that moment, I have no answer for it.
There's so much more that we could talk about, but time is relentless and we have to leave it here. Rainer Höss, thank you for having faced my microphone and for having been so frank in your answers. But before you go, my last comments are the words of Jonathan Littell from the book Die Wohlgesinnten, the Kindly Ones. And here's my translation. Are you really sure the war is over? In a certain way, the war is never over, or it's over when the last child born on the last day of the war is well and truly buried, and even thereafter it lives on in their children and children's children until this inheritance gradually diminishes, the memory fades, and the pain eases off. Think about it, dear listeners. Can we not also apply these words to the Arabs in Israel? Come to think of it, these words are not really the brainchild of Jonathan Littell. It's the wisdom of God, who knew that the generation that came out of Egypt would never be satisfied and therefore had to die, and that took 40 years.
On this day, hear us pray, each prayer meant for you. B'yom HaShoah Yikatevu.
So until next week, when I bring you more news, views and interviews from Israel and the rest of the Jewish world, this is Walter Bingham wishing all my Jewish listeners a healthy month of Iyar, to my Muslim friends Ramadan Mubarak, and to everyone else, may there be no more corona death. All who are sick, I wish a full and speedy recovery. At this time, it is particularly important to look in on your elderly neighbor. Goodbye.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook, and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.